Change is a grassroots anti-racist organization empowering our community to organize for a more inclusive city. We have adopted this traffic island in Germantown to maintain, beautify, and spread seeds of justice and equality in Quincy. While caring for this island, we hope to improve the green space for this neighborhood to enjoy, while also creating opportunities to come together as a community, learn about the environment, and gain knowledge to advocate for ourselves and others. Because Germantown and the Four River Basin are home to long-time industrial sites, including the newly built compressor station. Ooh, we have much we have to continue to fight for. So all of us can live safely and thrive. We'd like to welcome and thank Reverend Betsy Sowers, who's behind me here, from FRAX, to share more on environmental justice. Reverend Betsy is involved in both faith-based and secular climate justice organizations and actions. These range from fossil fuel divestment to energy policy at the State House and federal level, to working with opponents on the new fracked gas infrastructure in the Commonwealth. She shares the connections between earth justice and other justice concerns that are intimately intertwined with racial, economic, gender, and immigration refugee status. Betsy came to her lifelong call to peace and justice ministry via her first post-college job as a flight attendant for Pan American World Airways, which gave her the gift of global awareness and brought her to Cambridge, where she found OCBC, a congregation that confirmed and encouraged her call. After earning her MSW at Boston College Graduate School of Social Work and the M Division at Harvard Divinity School, she was called as a staff person and later the director in the Department of Church and Society of the American Baptist Churches of Massachusetts, serving as educator and advocate for peace and justice matters to Baptist churches in the Commonwealth. She also served the Massachusetts Council of Churches as adjunct associate director. A clear call out of retirement to climate justice services has both surprised and energized her for another chapter of activist ministry. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Reverend Betsy Sowers. Thank you so much.
Thank you all, and if you all promise to stay 6 feet away from me, I'll take my mask off so you can hear me better when I'm talking. Great, thank you. Thanks so much for that introduction. And yeah, the most important, it could have been a lot shorter. I'm on the board of Four River Residents Against the Compressor Station, and I live right over there in Weymouth. So it's a pleasure to be here with my neighbors today. And I want to thank especially Quincy for Transformative Change, Quincy Climate Action Network, North Quincy Green Students Movement, and Quincy Tree Alliance for planning this event and for including FRAX in your program. I've been asked to give a teach-in on environmental justice. So that seems to me to be really appropriate since we are standing right here today in an environmental justice community. But I want to, before I begin on the local part, I want to mention that this is part of a global context in which the consequences of extraction and pollution are all over this planet, falling first and worst on people of color and people of low wealth, who in most circumstances are the ones who have done the least to cause the problem at hand. So let's begin at the beginning. What is environmental justice, or EJ for short, which I will use so that we won't be here all afternoon? EJ exists within the larger climate movement, but in the United States, EJ is specifically a legal framework. It's designed to protect vulnerable communities from being overburdened with pollution. I'll read you the Massachusetts definition of EJ. Environmental justice is based on the principle that all people have a right to be protected from environmental pollution and to live in and enjoy a clean and healthful environment. EJ is the equal protection and meaningful involvement of all people with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies, and equitable distribution of environmental benefits. I want you to note and remember that it said both equal protection and meaningful involvement of people in decisions that affect them and their neighborhoods. Now, for those of you who are policy wonks, the framework in Massachusetts is Article 97 of our Constitution, Executive Order 552 of Deval Patrick, the 2017 EJ policy, and now parts of the recently passed Next Generation Climate Bill that just passed a couple of months ago. Bravo. EJ communities are determined by one or more of three census tract criteria. This is how you get to be an EJ community. First, 25% or more of the residents are minorities. Second, 25% or more have English isolation, and that just means basically that they're immigrant communities where a lot of people are English learners. And third, median household income below 65% of the state median. And as you know, Germantown, Quincy Point, and parts of East Braintree are all EJ communities right here. And if you draw a circle around the mouth of the Fall River, within 2 miles are all of those EJ communities. So some of the experiences that EJ communities have, and not all of those are here, but many of them are: more air pollution, lack of access to gardens and fresh food, lack of access to safe outdoor spaces for health and recreation, heat islands from lack of tree canopies and green spaces, housing that emits more carbon because it's old, it has old heating systems, poor insulation, causing both indoor and outdoor air pollution, lack of engagement in decisions that affect them, physical, mental, and spiritual health problems. And we know that right here in the basin we have elevated asthma, cancer, neurological diseases, and that COVID is far higher in EJ communities than in other communities around the state, around the world. And then there's a whole other set of issues for indigenous communities on their land rights and the rights to make decisions about their historic lands. So you may ask, wait a minute, you just told us we have EJ laws, so why do we still have all of these problems? I mean, it ought to be a great thing to be living in an EJ community, right? You're protected by all of these laws and these policies. Well, the short answer for why that's not the case is environmental racism. For more than 50 years, and this basically goes back to the Nixon administration when they first started measuring this statistic, the number one way to find pollution in the United States is to look for the zip codes of people of color. The number two way is to look for the zip codes of people with low wealth. And that's where you're going to find the pollution. And that has not changed since 1970. And probably goes back way before 1970, but before that they weren't measuring it. So environmental racism, I want to point out, is not, and we were just talking about this, is not the same as bigotry. I mean, people can get really defensive when you talk about environmental racism and say, I'm not a bigot, I don't hate people of color. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about structural racism that's baked in and has been baked in to our society for about as long as we've had a society. And that affects people regardless of other people's opinions about them. So, environmental racism, I'll just give you one example, is a result of practices like redlining, which goes back over 100 years, which pushed people of color and low wealth into industrial areas, flood zones, and other areas that were deemed undesirable, which the result was then, more white people were living in safe, clean neighborhoods, and more people of color were living in polluted and dangerous neighborhoods. And even though redlining is now illegal, those patterns have persisted. Those neighborhoods are there, and they tend to perpetuate themselves. Environmental racism also happens when seemingly neutral policies have disparate effects on communities. I'll give you one example. The Baker administration has a preference for clustering polluting facilities kind of all together, grouping them to protect more of the state and keep more of the state clean. Well, that sounds good on paper, but in reality, that creates sacrifice zones where things like right over here are clustered together, but they're not clustered together in the middle of nowhere. They're clustered together in those places that were redlined to start with, and they just get worse and worse. So you get sacrifice zones in communities in color and low wealth without anybody having to hate anybody. Sacrifice zones cause immediate injury to the people and to the environment in the affected communities. But the pollution that starts there eventually impacts everyone and everything and destroys the ecosystems for the entire planet. Just a couple of stats. In 2018, this just came out recently, in 2018, 8.7 million people globally died from air pollution. 8.7 million people. And 150 species are going extinct every day. And that is all directly connected to environmental racism. I always like to quote Hop Hopkins from the Sierra Club, who has, I just think, the most important statement about all of this. He says, quote, "You can't have climate change without sacrifice zones, and you can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people, and you can't have disposable people without racism." And that's what we're talking about when we talk about environmental justice communities. So, closer to home, how did environmental racism factor in the siting of the Weymouth compressor station right over there? In addition to the policy I just talked about clustering polluters, I want to just say quickly 3 other factors among the many that cause this to happen. The first is the failure to consider cumulative impact. So that's at the federal and the state levels. In permitting the Enbridge frac gas compressor station, only the pollution that this one facility would emit was considered. That's in spite of the fact that we have, as you know, like 10 other emitters already here, plus the marine traffic, plus the automobile traffic. All of the pollution that was already here was already above EPA safe limits before they even began to talk about siting the compressor station. But because of the rules being the way they are, the structural racism, that all that pollution wasn't even looked at. Only the pollution from the one facility was looked at. And even then it was only looked at in the numbers that Enbridge gave them. Nobody independently verified how much pollution was going to come out of it. And so our Mass DEP said, well, there's no need to engage the environmental justice communities because this facility isn't going to make enough pollution to make a difference, as though the air were already pure and only a small amount of pollution was going to come out. So remember what I said about engaging people in the decisions that affect their lives. That's how they got away with not doing that. Second, the intent to discriminate versus disparate impacts. We talked about that in theory, but in practice, in legal practice, both at the federal and state levels, often people who want to fight facilities like this have to prove that there was an intent to discriminate to get civil rights laws implemented. And as you know, it's almost impossible to prove an intent to discriminate. And in fact, maybe there wasn't a direct intent to discriminate, but you know, heck, it was already a sacrifice zone. So, you know, again, we don't look at it. It's really hard to prove in court. And finally, regulatory capture. And that's a term that describes the very cozy relationship between the people who are in the industry and the people who are supposed to be regulating them. And there's a revolving door where a lot of times people who work in the regulatory side of things end up, their next job is in the industry, and then maybe they'll come back and be a regulator. So the people who are regulating have a lot of incentive to do what the industry wants, because that might be their next employer. So they have a lot of incentive to put their own self-interest over the interest of the people they're supposed to be serving in the regulations. Now that's all the bad news. Now I'm going to do some good news. Let's do some good news. There are solutions in the works that could stop this cycle of sacrifice zones and racial injustice. I'm just going to give you a few examples. In Massachusetts, as I mentioned, the Next Generation Climate Bill was recently passed, and that has the potential to be a real game changer. For one thing, it does mandate that they're going to have to start considering the background, the existing pollution whenever they're permitting a new facility. However, the devil is in the details, and this is where you all come in. The bill mandates that to happen, and it mandates the Executive Office in Energy and Environmental Affairs to draft regulations, and within the next 6 or 8 months, I think they're supposed to draft the regulations. But those regulations could end up being full of giant loopholes, right? Because the lobbyists from the industry we know will be there, and they could really water down these things. So it's up to us to keep our eye on what's going on in the legislature and in the drafting of these regulations to make sure that the intent of this great bill that just passed is fulfilled. The bill also strengthens many of the other environmental justice priorities that are in the 2017 policy that haven't been enforced. So we hope now that they're going to be enforceable, and if they're not, we're just going to have to be on them. In fact, Senator Barrett, who was one of the drafters of the bill, really called out Governor Baker kind of publicly and said, we're watching you, and you better stick with the intent of this bill, because we, the legislature, are going to come after you if you don't. So that was good news. Second good news in Massachusetts, the 2021 legislative priorities of Mass Power Forward are environmental justice priorities. And for those of you who don't know, Mass Power Forward is an umbrella group of over 200 organizations, both environmental groups, labor groups, faith groups, and more, who work together on environmental policy and legislation up at the State House. And all of the bills on their priorities for this year are all EJ bills. I often do things like this virtually now, where I can give you a link and take you right to those bills, and I can't do that today. But if you go to, there's an environmental justice table, and there's also Mass Renews, or the two organizations that drafted the environmental justice bills. And if you can find their sites, you can find links to those bills, and write your state legislators about supporting those. And the ask right now is for them to co-sponsor, because this is early in this 2-year legislative session. So the environmental justice bills will need some co-sponsors to get through this, the whole process. Then on the federal side, and this is one of my favorites, the newly appointed chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, Richard Lick, has stated that environmental justice and climate change will be central from now on in the permitting of energy projects. And this is a 180-degree turnaround for this body, which over the past 30 years has rubber stamped every single project to come before it, I think with 2 exceptions. And so it's a wonderful thing that they are going to actually be looking at climate change and environmental justice as factors in permitting, and that they have indeed, many of you are aware, they reopened the consideration of the compressor station over here for more legal briefs. So we, everybody keep your fingers crossed, and if you're praying, people pray for FERC to do the right thing, and both with our situation and other situations going forward. The EPA Office of Environmental Justice was basically on the map for the past 4 years, and it is back up and running, and they're having public virtual meetings. You can go to the EPA Environmental Justice website and sign up to get email notices when the meetings are happening, and you can attend virtually and ask questions. It's really quite remarkable. There's a new White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, it's called WHEJAC for short, that has some of the top environmental people from all over the country on it, directly advising the president. And the even better news is that one of those people is Maria Belen Power, who some of you know from Green Roots Chelsea, who I know because her aunt is a member of my church. But she is a force of nature, fighting like crazy for environmental justice in Chelsea. And she's very much familiar with our situation down here and how similar it is to their situation there. So through her, we have direct access to the White House, which is a great thing. And then, of course, the new federal policy is to mainstream environmental justice and climate change policy across the entire government and not just stick them in the EPA, places like that. So that's a good thing. As you know, just on Thursday, there was a global summit that was held with global leaders. And so things are happening. And also just this week, because it's Earth Week, Senators Markey and Representative Ocasio-Cortez reintroduced the Green New Deal, and Senator Warren introduced the Build Green Act, I think just yesterday, which includes transit and housing and all those other things, not just the power plants, and also the jobs. It's the creation of the jobs that we're going to need to clean up the environment and the housing. So all of that good news that I just shared is the result of years and years and years of people organizing. This didn't just happen, and I guarantee you it wouldn't be happening now if people had not organized and if people weren't just keeping the pressure on all of our folks of both parties. This isn't a partisan thing, having clean air to breathe and clean water to drink and having trees and green spaces and safe oceans and species not going extinct. These are not partisan issues. These are issues of survival, they're moral issues, and they're issues that depend on us because we know the polluters have lots of money and they have lots of lobbyists. So we have to be right there in the mix as well with our elected leaders, as well as the personal. We all want to have personally sustainable behaviors, but those are not enough. It's not enough to drive a green car. It's not enough to be a vegan. It's not. All of those things are great, but they're not going to get us there because we really have to stop I think it's fewer than 100 corporations that are responsible for something like 75% of the pollution in the world. I never get those numbers quite right, but it's the huge majority of the pollution is from these mega polluters. So we really have to be taking them on. So organizations like Quincy for Transformative Change, Quincy Climate Action Network, North Quincy Green Students Movement, Quincy Tree Alliance, and FRAX are a few of those places where I encourage you all to get involved and be part of the solution, because if we all work together, if we all come together, we really can do this. So thank you very much. And I want to turn it over to Margaret just briefly, just an announcement for you. One thing that you can do right now.
Thank you, Betsy. Four River Residents Against Compressor Station is so proud to have Betsy Sowers as a board member. She is an amazing woman, as you can tell. I just wanted to ask you if you're interested. This is a short little description of an update of what's going on at the compressor station. Feel free to take one. And I also have some stickers that look really good on your car. So, thank you.
Do we have anyone else from any of the other organizations that'd like to say a few words?
Talk about their organization.
Talk about their organizations? Yeah. I was going to say, Maggie, you want to come?
Hi, Maggie.
Thank you.
Hi, I raised $400.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Maggie McKee, and I'm a member of QFTC and also Quincy Climate Action Network and a brand new group called the Quincy Tree Alliance, which as a group of volunteers trying to work together to protect and expand the city's urban forest. So a lot of us have noticed trees being cut down in our neighborhoods. Many of them are very old, and so we're going to work together to try to get the city to stop doing that. And we actually have a new tree warden, so we're going to be working with him as well. So I will put a sign-up sheet for anyone who wants to get emails about any of that. And if anyone is a resident of Quincy and wants to sign a petition separately for a social justice department, for a city social justice and equity department, that would be a great thing to do. I'll put that on the table as well, given that Quincy, most of Quincy qualifies as environmental justice neighborhood. So we've got a lot of work to do. Thank you. Oh, and also, Christine Cotter at Healing Tree Yoga did an Earthday fundraiser for the Quincy Tree Alliance and raised almost $400 for us. So thank you so much. That was great. And if anyone else wants to say anything.
Also, Quincy for Transformative Change is also hosting a vigil tonight at 7 p.m. In front of the Quincy Police Station to honor the memories of all the people who have been victims of police violence. Because even with the verdict that came out this week, we still have a lot of work to do. It's not real justice until we have a system where people aren't being killed by the police at kind of alarming rate. So I encourage everyone to come out to that event. It's at 7 p.m. In front of Quincy Police Station. Thanks.
All right, and if there's not anybody else, I guess we'll just first say Happy Earth Day to everybody. And I'm so glad that we could come together on this beautiful day and make some art and hear from such wonderful speakers like Reverend Sowers. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have a little kind of combining parade and protest together. We're going to do a little bit of a parade, so we're going to take some of the artwork that we made and we're going to go walk along the beach and then come back. And then we'll wrap up for the day. So just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us, and thank you for all the co-sponsors, and we appreciate you. Take care of yourselves, be kind to the earth, and happy Earth Day. Thank you.